Hello, I'm Dr. Katie Deming, and welcome back to Born to Heal. As someone who teaches about the importance of creating space for healing, I know how essential it is to practice what I preach. So we are taking a break in August. This gives myself and my team time to recharge and prepare for some exciting things coming your way this fall. I wanted to leave you with some of our most popular episodes and a few conversations where I was guest on other shows. You'll hear powerful stories of healing and practical tools you can implement in your own life. And if this podcast has been helpful to you, would you consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast platform you use? Your reviews help us reach more people who could benefit from these conversations about true healing and wellness. I'm grateful for this community we've built together and look forward to reconnecting with you soon. Until then, take care of yourselves. And remember, you were truly born to heal.
Today on the podcast, we had the pleasure of interviewing Katie Deming, Dr. Katie Deming. She is the Conscious Oncologist. She is a former radiation oncologist and healthcare leader, inventor, and TEDx speaker who is transcending the boundaries of conventional and integrative medicine to create a new paradigm of cancer prevention, treatment, and post-treatment healing. Her methods center on helping those with cancer detoxify and nourish their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual selves so that they can activate their body's innate ability to heal. Now, although her bio specifically talks about, people with cancer and oncology, this was a very broad podcast that could, really speak to anyone who's looking to up their health, because we got into a lot of general things that anyone could do.
Definitely. And especially, well, yes, obviously, if there's cancer, someone who has cancer, or you yourself, unfortunately, have cancer too, then yes, Katie seems like is a really solid option to look into, because she said toward the end of the episode that she has actually had 2 successful cases of people healing cancer through her work. Mm-hmm. And it's literally only been in 6 months since she's been in practice, because her work is relatively new, but she's been going down this path for years now, as she shared. So we're excited to share this with you because personally, I not only learned a lot, especially about water.
Water. Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, we actually spend a good 15 minutes on water in this episode, but how water and specific ways in which you actually have water, like the filtered, or we talked about hydrogen water, different ways that water is meant to be structured or had. It's not the way current modern water is through tap or anything. So that was really fascinating. But even if you don't have cancer, even if you are healthy, but you want to become healthier, I feel like any illness could be helped with what we covered and what Katie shared, honestly.
Yeah. And if you're using tap water or a Brita, you need to listen to at least the middle of the episode.
Exactly. You got to up your water game.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome to the Science and Spirituality Podcast, where we dive deep into universal spiritual principles and ground them in modern science. My name is Chris Carton.
And my name is Kevin Carton. And we are committed to simplifying the spiritual side of success for you with easy to understand scientific research, so you could walk away with practical tools to create radical transformations in your life. Let's get started. So Dr. Katie Deming, welcome to the Science and Spirituality Podcast. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's dive into your story and just begin with this transition that you've made. I saw in your bio about, you were an oncologist, but now you're doing something different. So tell us about that journey.
Sure. So I am a radiation oncologist by my background. So that's what my training is. And I practiced for 20 years as a radiation oncologist as well as a healthcare leader. So really was my healthcare administration interest was in designing better cancer care, more patient-centered, to help people get the best outcomes with treatments and making sure things were really coordinated. So I ran the cancer service line for a large healthcare organization within the US. And in 2019, I started to have this sense maybe I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. And it didn't make sense because I didn't finish my training as a radiation oncologist until I was 32. So all of the training that I went through, was a lot to get to where I was. And so this idea of maybe I wasn't supposed to be practicing as a radiation oncologist really didn't make sense. And my husband at the time was also like, well, maybe you really have everything that someone else would want. So you have, a really lucrative career. You work 4 days a week. You have meaningful work. You're treating people with cancer and making a difference. Your colleagues love you. Your patients love you. Maybe if you are not happy, something's wrong with you. Like maybe you're never going to be happy if you're not happy in this, position. And so I internalized that for a little while thinking, I don't know, maybe something is wrong with me. Maybe I'm never going to be happy because I couldn't explain it. It was just this like little niggling feeling that something was wrong. And then in 2020, I had just been nominated for a very high level position nationally within the organization that I was with. And they had nominated me to be medical director of all of cancer care nationally. And I would have been in charge of screening, prevention, diagnosis, treatment, through survivorship or end of life for 12 million Americans. So a very big job. And I had spent like 4 months interviewing for this position. And in the end, it came down to me and one other woman, and the other woman received the position. And I knew when that happened, I was like, I know I meant to build something, but I'm sure it's not within the system. I was very clear at that point that something's just not quite right, but I still couldn't say what it was or whether I needed to leave, that kind of thing. But a couple weeks after I finished that interview process, I had an experience called a shared death experience. And it's very similar to a near-death experience, but the person who has the experience doesn't die, is not the one who's actually dying. They are at the scene where someone else is dying. And they cross the veil, they experience the love and the light and all of that without having gone through like their heart stopping or any of that. And it's uncommon, but when it happens, it most commonly happens to healthcare providers, emergency personnel, people who are typically at the scene where, accidents happen or people may transition. So that happened to me in the fall of 2020. And after that, I knew I had to leave. Like it was no longer this niggling feeling. It was like, no, you have to go. What you're doing is not right. Like, and I'm not saying all of Western medicine is not right, but it became very clear to me that this was not true healing and this was not where I was meant to be. And so it took me a couple years to unravel that because, as you can imagine from the first conversations that I had with my husband, he did not get this. And he was like, why would you do this? And you still have student loans. And what are you going to do? Like, what do you mean if you left? And so I just walked through that because I knew as an oncologist, I've spent a lot of time around death. And my whole career, actually, the reason why I went into oncology was by hospice work. And that was really my introduction. And so I've spent a lot of time around people who are dying. And I know that the top regret that people have is that I wish I had had the courage to be myself and do what I knew was true and not listen to what everyone else was telling me to do. And so I had that as this background. Like I knew that I didn't want to be that person at the end of my life looking back with regret. And so I basically had to unravel my life, including getting a divorce, selling everything so I could start over. Because one of the things that happened with that event was that I knew I needed to leave and I knew what we were doing wasn't healing, but I didn't know what the answer was. It was like I was shown what wasn't working, and then I needed to trust that what was meant for me was going to reveal itself. And so I started just letting things go and realizing that this is very scary. I had no idea where I was headed, but I started looking into what makes us truly well. Because in medicine, I was taught all about pathophysiology, like what's wrong with the body, and then how do you use pharmaceuticals, or in my case, radiation, to fix that problem. But I was never taught, number one, I was never taught anything about nutrition. Number two, I was never taught what an optimal human looks like. How do you create a vital, really well human being? And so that's where I just started studying and diving into everything about what makes us well. And that ultimately led me to my current practice, which I call Conscious Oncology. And it puts consciousness at the foundation of the healing within my practice.
Wow, beautiful story. So it's kind of interesting. You're still doing oncology. It's just you kind of put like your own like twist on it. So like oncology is something that you've always had a passion for since the beginning, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Was there I guess like a singular maybe patient story or like a group of patients while you were still a regular oncologist that kind of made you start to sense like, okay, this is not really true healing? Like, was there like any examples that you can kind of go through? And I guess also how were you starting to formulate like how a shift in consciousness or like a shift in language or emotions could have helped them further than what you were kind of taught?
Sure. At the time when I was practicing, I didn't have a clue about any of this stuff. So it's only in retrospect, looking back, that I can see that. But you know, what's interesting is, I mean, I saw so many patients. I saw 5,000 patients over my career. So it's just like so many people, and there's so many examples. But one of the things that really started to like get my attention was actually a parable that I heard at a meditation retreat. This was like, I can't remember, that maybe 2017 or so. I was at a meditation retreat with a colleague who was a GYN oncologist. And the meditation leader, or the retreat leader, told this story is called the parable of the river. And basically the story goes like this, that there's a village along a river, and one day the villagers noticed a body. Someone was drowning in the river. And so the villagers rushed out, they rescued the person, they got them onto dry land, and, you know, that was it. But the next day, there were 2 people now drowning in the river. And so the villagers organized and they rescued these 2 people and got them out of the river. And then next day there were 4, and then there were 8 and 16, and it just kept doubling. Every day there were more bodies falling in the river. And the villagers organized themselves. They created this very elaborate rescue system. They had boats and pulleys and, you know, just this elaborate system to help rescue these people out of the river. And the village elders were praising the villagers for what an amazing job they were doing. And I turned to my colleague and I said, this is Western medicine, and what the heck is going on upstream? Why we are glorified rescue workers, just pulling people off, putting them on dry land. But by the way, we have no idea why they fell in. And then the other thing is, we're not teaching them how to get well once we get them on dry land. If we don't know what caused the problem, then we're just putting them back into danger. And that's what I saw in my practice, was that even when I started shifting, right? So there were 2 years that I practiced between this event and actually leaving, where I started coaching my clients on the things that they could do to really start to prioritize their well-being, and doing some of the emotional work and doing the pieces that now have become part of my practice. And I remember there was this one patient where during her radiation, I would see her weekly. And actually, this is one of the things that I loved about my specialty, is that I got to know my client or my patients very well, because I saw them every week while they were having treatment. And it could be, 5-6 weeks of treatment. And so she had been doing so well, prioritizing herself, starting to set boundaries, really doing the work to shift the way that she had been living before her diagnosis. Because I truly believe that in order to heal, you need to change the patterns that made you sick in the first place. And so she'd been doing so well. And she came back for her 6-week follow-up. And I was asking her, like, how is it going? And she was like, oh, Dr. Deming, I just can't keep up all of that, because my family had taken up all the slack while I was in treatment. And now I've got to just take care of everything because there's so much to do and all this stuff. And I was just like, oh my goodness, here we go. She's going to fall back in the river, because if you don't change the patterns, we're not changing the underlying problem. And for me, it's stories like that where it's just frustrating to see that the system is not designed, number one, to teach people this importance, that when you're sick, it's a signal that something is wrong in your life and your body. And it's like, we can deal with the problem, which is cancer, right? So that's what Western medicine is, killing the cancer. but we need to shift the patterns that have led to development of cancer, right? If we have a body that is growing cancer, it tells you that something is out of alignment, because normally we have cancer cells in our body every day. But when you have a healthy, optimally functioning body and immune system, it takes care of those cells. It's only when we get out of balance that then we have the development of cancer. And so for me, it was really that, like, where I just felt like, yes, I'm making a difference. Yes, we're, dealing with one problem, but I just saw that it was not getting at the root of why we're getting sicker and sicker. And the other thing is that I was watching the statistics and, incidence of cancer, obesity, neurodegenerative disease, all of these diseases are just skyrocketing. And I saw this over my career. So practicing for 20 years, I saw this shift and I saw younger people coming into my clinic. And then if we're doing such a good job in Western medicine and we spend so much money on medical care, we're not doing a good job based on these metrics. People are getting sicker and sicker. And the statistics say that today, 1 in 2 men will develop cancer in their lifetime and 1 in 3 women. And for me, that's unacceptable. That's not the way it was a couple hundred years ago. And so for me, it's really about how do we start to look at what this problem is and solve it for real, get to the underlying issues for people.
Well, thank God you're doing that kind of work. I think the whole world needs it. But do you find that a lot of people are waking up to that fact, like whether it's your patients or as well as other practitioners? Like, do you see that there's like this shift that's happening?
Yeah. So I'll start with medicine, like inside the system. And I'll say something too, because I realize that until you step outside, you can't really see the problem because you're so intertwined, like all of your security and everything is tied up in the system. And by the way, you've also been indoctrinated and trained into this particular way of thinking in a very strong way. The way that doctors are trained, they're exhausted, they're sleep deprived, they're not eating properly. And then they're taught into this system, and that's indoctrination, right? And so it's hard to see it when you're inside. And for me, like the analogy that I like to use is that when I was in the bottle, I couldn't see the label on the outside of the bottle. I didn't know what this was all about. And now that I'm outside, I can see it more clearly of what this is all about. And so I think the physicians and people within medicine are trapped. I think they know there's a problem. If you look at, this is not, you see it if you're within physician groups. Physician suicide is huge, huge problem. Behind attorneys, I think they are the second highest rate of suicides. And every day I'll see a post of another physician who's committed suicide. And I actually think that if I hadn't had all of the experience that I had around death and knowing the regrets that they have, I think that I could have been one of those statistics with a husband who wasn't supportive of this idea. Something's wrong with you. Right. And so I think physicians feel trapped, and a lot of them are choosing their way out through suicide, which is so sad. But then the other thing is many of them are leaving to become life coaches. And then the interesting thing that I think is actually really unfortunate, and I understand now why this is happening, but the physicians who are being trained as life coaches, they then intentionally don't coach it within their specialty because legally they could get in trouble for it. Wow. And actually, I'm a rare example of a physician who's left my specialty and then stayed within the same space and functioning in a coaching capacity because I'm not diagnosing or using pharmaceuticals in my practice. And so there's a lot of things about the systems, the nuances that, like, actually I just had a call with an attorney 2 days ago because I started my practice under a coaching license or contracts, I guess, with my clients so that they know I'm not developing a patient-doctor relationship and I'm not prescribing or diagnosing, but I can use all my expertise to help them navigate and, do diet and supplements and all the other work. But basically, they told me, I was asking if I could create a private practice where for select patients who I wanted to order lab tests and I wanted to prescribe, that I could do that for them, but it wouldn't necessarily be all of my clients. And so then they told me that, no, that's illegal.
Wow.
Like it's a stark violation, which is like a kickback law. You're referring to yourself. And I was like, I know, and he was like, well, what's more important to you is all the stuff that you're doing with the diets and supplements and, emotional work and all of that. Is that more valuable to your patients, or is it the lab testing and the pharmaceuticals? I'm like, no doubt it's all this other stuff. And he said, well, you got to choose one. So, and I was just like, wow. Yeah. So I understand this. I think the doctors are waking up, but I think the system and the powers at play are really challenging. Yep. And it's hard for them to step out. So that's that side. And then I will say I see a huge change in patients or people who are dealing with illness saying, no, I'm not doing it the standard way, and I'm not going to follow your protocol, and I want to find out what my other options are. And so that, to me, I see is a good sign, because that's going to force change when people are insisting that they have these other options. And you're starting to see startups, and I've been approached, actually, given my expertise in building, systems of cancer care, of these organizations that are wanting to build platforms to help people access the holistic, services that can support them in their healing. So I think it's happening. I think it's going to be really messy. I think the system is broken for sure. And I'm not sure that a change is going to come from within the system, but I think people are speaking with their money and with their attention.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think, because Kev, we've talked about the medical system as a whole a few times on this podcast. And I think the conclusion that we've always kind of gotten to was it's going to have to be the patients at large that are going to have to start requesting different types of things. I think one really good example of that is the NIH and, their funding. And I think it was like the early 2000s or maybe the late 1990s, a lot of patients started to seek out alternative medicines like, acupuncture, massage, chiropractic, and they actually had to increase the funding of the NIH and build a specific branch to start studying these things because so many people were seeking it out. I think that's kind of the shift that's going to have to happen, was with the individual just seeking better care and, just kind of having enough with the system. I did have a kind of a question. So I guess, when you're working with patients from this perspective, is there something that you can take out of just say oncology and people who are sick to just the average person, like some certain things that they should be doing, or maybe can like paint a picture of like what like a healthy person looks like and like what they could be doing emotionally, from their thought processes and all that stuff, just to get your perspective.
Sure. Well, and this was my goal. Is I was like, I want to get ahead, like before people get cancer. But, one of the things that I've learned in this practice is that people with cancer are really motivated to make some big changes. And when people are healthy, or like they think they're healthy and kind of it's going okay, it's harder to make some of these big changes. So let me explain what I think is happening and why we're getting sicker. And then I can address like what you can be doing to fortify yourself, because that's what I've spent the past couple of years changing my whole lifestyle so that I can be healthy. But basically, I think the problem is this, that our modern lifestyle is making us sick. Okay, so we're disconnected from the natural sources of nourishment, like the earth, right? So we used to live walking on the earth all day, sleeping on the earth. The earth is a like amazing source of electrons, which reduce inflammation in the body. We're disconnected from the sun because everyone's, the dermatologists are telling you to wear sunscreen and you're wearing sunglasses, and we are designed actually for nourishment from the sun, just like plants, but we've been taught now to be afraid of this source of energy that has never been a problem for, millions of years, but suddenly we think it's a problem. And by the way, we're getting sicker at the same time. So you put those two things together and say, well, if sunscreen and sunglasses are so effective, why are we having so much more skin cancer and sunburn, all that? So, but I think that we're moving so fast. We have so much stress. We're not eating the right foods. We're eating a lot of processed foods. We're eating more sugar than we've ever eaten. We're eating a lot of genetically modified foods, that even the vegetables and stuff that we're eating. And then they're also, glyphosate or Roundup is in everything. You just can't even get away from it because it's covering the earth. It's in the air. It's in the soil. So there's so many things in there that are affecting us. And I think the thing is that, and you can see that if you look at the rise of all these illnesses, like I said, diabetes, obesity, neurodegenerative disease, cancer, they're all rising. And it's correlating with the shift in our lifestyle. And so I think it comes down to we have to shift the way that we're living. We can't just keep going at the same rate that we're going and doing the same things and expect a different outcome. And so for me, it's not like I'm here on a screen with you with lights and everything, and this is another piece of, electrosmog and blue light and all this stuff. It's like, no, we're going to live our life. Like we're going to use the technology, but then you have to understand that it has an impact on your body and your well-being. And so you need to do other things to fortify yourself and to create more resilience in the body. It's not about eschewing the modern lifestyle. It's about putting things in that are getting you what you need and then being more mindful about the things that are toxic for your body, which we are surrounded by, right? Between products, foods, all the things. And so a couple things that I think are really simple are, number one, getting your water right. So we are bodies of water. Our bodies are 99.9% water if you look at the molecules. We're 70% water by volume, like if you just look at the volume of the human body, but our molecules are 99.9% water. Most of us are drinking toxic water. The water that comes out of your tap has chlorine. Most states have fluoride. They have other carcinogens in there. But the other piece that people don't realize is they also have pharmaceuticals in the water because the sewer water is cleaned with the water that comes through the municipal system. So there's contamination there. And the study, now it's been probably, I don't know, maybe 16, 17 years ago, but they tested municipal tap water in different cities in the US and they found chemotherapy agents, antidepressants, hormones, antibiotics, a whole bunch of things that we just don't want in our body. So the first thing that I would say to people is you need to get good filtered water. And that is not from a Brita filter or the filter in your refrigerator. That's something like reverse osmosis or one of these other ones that use nano filters. But getting clean filtered water, I would say, is like a huge must, given that we are water. So that's number one. The second thing is looking at what you're eating, processed foods. We all know this. This is simple. Like with the food, it's like, but it's so hard. And the other thing is that I just had this conversation with my colleague and friend who's a naturopath, and she started asking at every restaurant, even at like very, conscious restaurants, are they mixing the olive oil with seed oils? And sure enough, you cannot eat out without getting seed oils. Basically, even if they say they're using olive oil, they're splitting it with canola oil. So it's like, eating out is a problem, which is frustrating, right? With the busy lifestyle and all of that. But it's like the processed foods, then the eating out where you can't control what's in the food. So, and then sugar, really sugar is a toxin. It's like, putting syrup in your blood, basically, the sugar in our diet. So those are two things that are so foundational and basic. But then the other thing is connecting with the elements and getting out into nature, grounding in the earth, to get those electrons to help combat the inflammation. I do walking in the morning when the sun is coming up to get the red light from the sun, and then going out in midday and getting, sunlight during the day. I don't wear sunglasses. So a lot of people don't know this, but our eyes are designed to register sunlight. And then it sends a signal to our skin to create melanin. And that's how we develop a tan, right? If you think about it, before we had sunglasses or anything, we were just outside all the time and we didn't have to wear sunscreen, right? It was because your eyes register the sunlight, tell your skin to make melanin, and then you develop a healthy tan. And people were spending more time out in the sun. If you're wearing sunglasses, your body is not getting the right signals that you're outside. And then if you do spend time outside without sunscreen, you're going to burn. right? So it's like, it's interesting. These things that are designed to protect us are actually maybe harming us. And also sunscreen, same thing, that when we slather ourselves with sunscreen, we're not getting the vitamin D that we need from the sun. So I don't wear sunscreen, and people are like, oh, you're going to age so fast. And I'm like, look at me, I'm 50. I never wear sunscreen on my face. And I only use castor oil on my skin. So I'm not using any of those products. I'm telling you that sunburning and aging and stuff is related to us not letting our bodies acclimate to the sun, and also our diet. So if you're eating a diet that's very high in carbohydrates or sugar, you're more likely to burn. And so these are things that we're just not taught, right? But it's like starting to, what I'm teaching my clients, and then these are things that anyone can do, is starting to look back to like, what are the nutrients that we were getting before we were living the lifestyle that we're living now?
I love how you started that with saying that it's from our modern lifestyle, because and then all the little practical things that you gave, it really kind of gives the power back to individuals, saying there are things that you can change. I have a couple of things to mention about each of those, though. The water piece. So when I moved to Florida, we originally had our tap water here, and the Florida water you can smell the chlorine in the tap water of Florida. It's wild. So we got a reverse osmosis water filter under the sink. It's great. So that's awesome. So the water thing is definitely a piece. I love that you mentioned grounding, because I did a paper on grounding in acupuncture school, and I think that's being slept on right now. Like there's so many health benefits from grounding, the electrons, the inflammation, all of that stuff. It's great. And then, diet. I think everyone can make small changes with their diet to really impact their health. I don't know if you've heard of this app called the Seed Oil Scout.
No.
It's an app. It costs like $2 a month. You pay for it, but basically, it shows you all of the restaurants in your area, and it shows you which ones use seed oils and which ones don't. And they kind of rate it with like a green, yellow, red system. So that's pretty cool. I don't know if you can potentially use that for clients who can kind of need that. It's a really interesting, nifty app. But yeah, I love all those things. It's the simple things that you do over time that can really end up making a huge difference.
Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing that app. I hadn't heard of that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think this is a thing. Cancer or these other chronic illnesses don't develop overnight. Mm-hmm. It's the cumulative. So exactly what you just said is making little changes. And also, when I started realizing how toxic everything is, initially I kind of freaked out. And this is what my clients do too. They're like, oh my gosh. But it's like, I tell them, I'm like, no, it's not, you're not going to get it perfect. Mm-hmm. It's making progress and doing the little things. And one of the other things that really for me was motivating is that, you asked about emotional, things that you can do from an emotional standpoint, but we have data that show emotional trauma has a higher incidence of illness, including cancer. So the biggest study on that is the ACE study, which is the Adverse Childhood Event Study, followed children from childhood into adulthood and counted the number of adverse childhood events, which could be sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, divorce of parents, parent incarcerated, a parent with substance abuse, kind of all these different things. And it looked at what is their incidence of getting an illness later in life based, depending on their ACE score. And what they found was the higher the number of these adverse childhood events, the higher the incidence of cancer, diabetes, heart disease. So we know there is this connection between emotional trauma and illness. And this is something that we're not talking about at all. But for me, when I went through my divorce and leaving, so like I had so many losses within 1 year. I lost my marriage. I lost my career that I had spent my whole life building. My mom died. I moved, all the major stressors that I knew I needed to fortify myself. And so with this process, I knew there were so many things that I needed to change about my life and my environment. But I knew that if I stressed about doing all of them, that was just adding to the emotional trauma and stress, right? And so I had to just take it one thing at a time, that I was like, okay, this is the first thing that I'm going to do. And then I'm going to do the next thing. And I think that's really important because it can be very overwhelming that you just feel like, oh my gosh, it's just not even worth it. Or or you're paranoid about everything, which I think is actually really problematic and can create illness. So I encourage that as people think about these changes, think about them as empowering. I love that you said that, Chris. This is empowering, that like we are not stuck with these statistics if we start to take the power back into our own hands and make decisions with our behavior.
Yeah. Well said.
Kev, do you have a question, or I can?
Well, it's more as just a comment, because I'm glad you really emphasized what you just said, Katie, that like the stress about making all these changes is really important to mitigate, because if you do, then it's just more of the same problem. Basically, it's like the same energy. So I love that. And I'm curious, is there any recommendation that you have usually, which I guess, Chris, I do have a question that just flowed out of this comment, but recommendations that you often give to clients to help them make those simple changes? Because I think a normal reaction for any human is like when they actually hear about all of these different toxic ways in which modern life is, it can be overwhelming, I think, just naturally. So what are the ways you approach that and how you help your clients or patients now?
Yeah, well, I start with what are they the most motivated to change, and looking at what for them already feels out of alignment that they know needs to shift, and maybe they just didn't have the push yet. And then we'll start there. And but the other thing is I do always start with the water. I'm like, the water is like a very foundational piece. So if you're going to make one change, this is a big one that can make a big difference for people. But then I think the thing is there's not like a right order to do these things. And sometimes I like to just find the low hanging fruit. Like, what's something that you already feel like you want to change, but maybe you hadn't had the time or motivation. And let's knock out the easiest ones first so that you start to get some confidence and success, because that motivates people. There's nothing less motivating than being overwhelmed and not making any progress, right? But if we start to make progress and they're like, oh, I can make these little shifts and changes, that's where I start. I start wherever the person is and what they're motivated to do. Because, if you have no motivation to do it, then it's going to be challenging to make those changes. So that's why I always say that. And then the other thing is that doing things that are going to give you the biggest impact on the way you feel. And so helping people with their circadian biology, like the sunrise and the sunset, you helping people get their rhythms right, and, blocking blue light in the evening, that kind of thing will help them sleep better. And if they're sleeping better, then they're going to feel better. So doing those things that I know can quickly make shifts, like the circadian rhythm stuff, I think is another good place to start. For some people, it's like, I don't want to wake up when the sun comes up. But if you wake up within the first 2 hours of the sun coming up and just face east and get some of that red light, it's telling your body, okay, it's daytime, we're coming online. And then if you get some midday sun, that's good for your vitamin D. And it's also just, you feel better with getting that sunlight. The sunlight structures the water in our bodies. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the work of Gerald Pollack. So Gerald Pollack is a researcher out of University of Washington, and he has a book called The Fourth Phase of Water. But water exists in 4 phases. We typically think of it as in 3 phases. So water, which is liquid. We think of water as liquid, right? And then ice, which is solid, and then steam, which is a vapor. And basically what he showed was that our water exists in a 4th phase. And that 4th phase of water is a gel-like phase. And you guys are going to geek out on this, actually. If you research the water stuff, it's really, really profound, because the main experiment that he did that demonstrated the existence of what he calls a 4th phase of water, or the other name for it is exclusion zone water, or easy water, was a study where they took a beaker of water and they put a tube made out of Nafion in the beaker of water. So imagine it like it's like a test tube that's open on both sides, and then it's down in the beaker of water. And what he noticed was that the water started moving through that tube in a specific direction. And there was no battery, connected to the beaker. It was like, what is the energy source and why is the water moving? And what he found was that the water on the inside of the tube started creating these hexagonal layers of water along the tube. And he called this exclusion zone water because it excluded, like if you put something in the water, like a solute or something, it would stay out of that area. So something about this water was keeping, things out of that layer. And then what he found is that layer of water is not H2O, it's H3O2. And because of that, it has a negative charge. So H3O2 has a negative charge, H2O has a positive charge. And it was that charge differential between this layer that was forming along the tube and the charge of the water in the beaker that was propelling it through. So it was showing that this water has a different property. And then he took the beaker of water and he put it in a lead vault. And what they found was the water stopped. And the reason why it stopped is because the energy source, the thing that was helping to develop this layer of easy water, was infrared, which we're surrounded by infrared. And the sun is our biggest source of infrared. And actually, when you go to nature, you start to see that plants, the water that plants hold in them is this fourth phase or easy water. And that's why, in the desert, people can survive without water because they eat the plants that have the structured water within it. And it turns out we are the same, that when we are optimally functioning, we have healthy mitochondria. The mitochondria are responsible for the mechanism of the structuring of the water. It's more complicated, but basically you need healthy mitochondria to make this happen. When we have healthy mitochondria, we structure the water in our cells, and this helps with the voltage of our cells. And healthy cells have like negative charge associated with them. So our negative charge actually comes from the easy water in our cells. So anyway, we are much like the plants in that the sun is nourishing us and structuring the water in our bodies.
Very interesting.
Wow.
It's the voltage piece of that is so interesting. I'm trying to think. I don't know if you've ever read this book or heard about it, Katie. It's called The Body Electric.
Mm-hmm.
And that book talks a lot about voltage and in the body, and that is a very interesting book. And the guy studied like regeneration in salamanders and like the positive and negative potential of the nervous system. So it's a really good book if anyone's super interested in voltage. It's a little bit of an older book with older work, but a lot of it still applies today, which is really interesting. I had just as a random question, it kind of relates to water. What's your take on like electrolytes in water? Because I know for people who have reverse osmosis water, I think it literally strips out everything. So it's literally just pure water, like no minerals or anything. So I kind of want to get your take on that for anyone who's thinking of like upping their filter game.
Yeah. Okay. So water, you get really bougie. I'm really bougie with my water because water it's a big deal. So filtration is the first step, but you're exactly right that water that is optimal would be an example of that is spring water, right? We're always looking to nature for like, what is the water that we would have been drinking? And spring water is filtered naturally through the rocks. So as the water runs through the layers of earth, it's naturally filtered. But then it's also mineralized, which you're talking about. So natural spring water is filtered, it's mineralized, it's also structured, like what I was just talking about. And then it also has light in it because there's light in the crystals and that infuses into the water. And so water that is ideal, like a spring water, has those four features. So you're absolutely right that if you use reverse osmosis, you want to add a pinch of salt to your water or take a mineral supplement so that you're getting that mineralization, because otherwise the water is less hydrating. If you drink water that is not mineralized, it can just run through you. So you can just add a pinch of salt. So I tell people you can do a pinch of Himalayan salt or volcanic salt or Celtic salt, and that will give you the minerals that you need. I personally don't use all of the electrolyte little packets. And I know that a lot of the people in the more natural space use LMNT. Personally, I just like to go with what nature's given us, but I think those are okay. I think that there's sweeteners. I think LMNT is probably the best one in terms of a packaged one, but just a pinch of salt would do that. But then the other thing is that to structure your water, you can use something. The cheapest way to do this is something called an analemma wand. And the analemma wand structures the water, and you basically just stir it in the water for about a minute. And you can actually do your day's water, like take a container and, make your water for the day and structure it, and it will keep it for that day. So the analemma wand, I think it's about $180. That's like the cheapest way to do that. Because I've been on this water quest, and it's funny, people who know me, they're like, oh, Katie's going to start talking about water again. Here we go. But for me, the one system on the market that actually does all of these things of filtering, structuring, mineralizing, and energizing is something called Spring Aqua. And basically, they call it a ecosystem in a box. They don't use any electricity in the process. It really is just using natural crystals and then nano filters for the filtration. But it creates the water that is ideally structured like this. And then I have the Wet 7 by Spring Aqua, and that one has structured, mineralized, filtered water on the left side. And then the right side is alkalinized and hydrogen water. And so, but you have to be careful. So this is one thing that I actually want people to know about water is a lot of people are drinking hydrogen water these days, and hydrogen water is alkalinized. And so it has a higher pH than our body. And you can overdrink alkaline water and basically shift your pH too much. And so generally the recommendation is 1 liter of alkaline water per day. If it's structured, like in the Spring Aqua, the idea is maybe it doesn't matter, because if you think about structured water in fruits, so an apple is more alkaline and an orange is more acidic. But when you eat those, it doesn't alkalinize or acidify your body because the water in those fruits is structured. Now, for me, I think that's theoretical. This is the idea. But so I still limit my amount of structure of hydrogen water to roughly 1 liter a day for that reason.
You can have a whole podcast on water.
Yeah. Oh, you could have a whole season on water. I'm telling you. Yeah.
Go ahead, Kev.
I got into it a bit because I've had psoriasis for many years in my life. And one of the things that I know is it's a lot of the gut, but then also like the pH of the body. And I looked into Kangen water. I'm curious if you're familiar with that and like what your take is on that, because that's hydrogen water.
Yes. So what's interesting is there is a woman, her name's Isabel Friend, and her website is Water is Life. And she is like just a wealth of knowledge about water, but she really cautions against Kangen or other hydrogen waters that are created through electrolysis, because you're electrocuting the water, and water is a living being. I don't know if that makes a difference, but sure. What she describes, because all she does is talk to people and counsel about water, is she says that oftentimes people who are drinking water that was created by electrolysis like Kangen they're kind of like a little bit more jumpy. And I don't have that experience, so I can't speak to it, but this is what I've heard. So I'm not sure. The unit that I use with Spring Aqua, they don't use electrolysis for their hydrogen water. There are 3 ways that you can create hydrogen water: magnesium, potassium, or electrolysis. And the system that I have uses potassium to do that.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Well, currently I tried out that system once, but I didn't really notice a ton of a difference, but it was also only for like about 2 months. But currently right now, I also use just an under the sink water filter called Hydroviv. They were on Shark Tank. And it's like a very unique like filtration system that's based on your city for like what's going on.
Oh yeah, for what's in your city. Yeah, and that Spring Aqua is the same way, is that they take your zip code and they're assessing your system to make sure it's filtering what is relevant for your area. So that's great, actually.
Sweet. And Hydroviv is actually pretty cheap. It's like think it's like 230 or something like that, 250 for like a system. And then it's like $70 every 6 months for like a new filter.
Oh,
So
yeah, so that's good. That's very affordable.
yeah, I've been really enjoying it a lot in the last, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years since I've had it.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just a complete side, more personal anything than anything.
I love it. I love learning about different systems. So
Yeah. Just to maybe, as we're kind of, running out of time here, sadly, but I know we talked a lot about water, which was the first, I guess, principle that you kind of brought up in the steps. Can you maybe share like a beginner tip for maybe food? Because I know food can be very confusing. And if you go to the supermarket, there's tons of things you can buy. Like there's, some people don't know how to read labels. Like, is there something that you tell clients who maybe don't know anything about nutrition, anything about food, like where to start with kind of upping your food game?
yeah. So what I say is that I look to what would we have done before we had all of this modern technology and the supermarkets. And the truth is we would have been eating meat that we would have hunted, and then we would have been eating a few plants and, fruits and vegetables that we could get in season. Mm-hmm. So I tell people to stick to the perimeter of the stores when you go in, and then really eating in season and eating, the meat that you eat. The quality of the meat is very, very important. So, there's all this about red meat being bad, but the truth is that red meat in the context of what? Industrialized red meat, and then with a diet that has a bunch of other processed foods and, too many carbohydrates. And it's like the studies, people say that red meat is inflammatory and bad, but then if you look at people on a ketogenic diet who are eating clean meat and very low carbohydrates, it's not inflammatory at all. And so for me, it's more about looking back to what we would have been eating. And so for me, I make sure I'm getting good protein, and the source of that protein is really important. So for red meat, it's grass-fed. If you can afford to do grass-finished, even better. But I think even if you can just get grass-fed, it's better knowing where your meat came from, buying it at the farmer's market, and getting it frozen. And now there's actually subscription services where these ranchers have gotten together and you can just have your meat shipped to you, and then but basically grass-fed if it's beef, pasture-raised for chicken, your eggs, making sure that those are pasture-raised. I think thinking about where your food is coming from and the frequency of these animals. So you always want to think about animals and plants, like the food that you're eating should be raised in the environment that is for its highest good and its lifetime, and then it's, used as food, but it's basically been treated humanely and given what it needs to have a full life before it's sacrificed for the food. So that's a big piece. And then I think really the seed oils is a big one. Just this is an easy one that you can just switch out right away. So getting rid of any seed oils. The oils that I use for cooking are olive oil, avocado oil, ghee, which is great, and then grass-fed butter. And I do a lot of grass-fed butter. And I think that there's this whole thing about like meat is bad or whatever, but the grocery store and the way that we eat today, if you think about it, a grocery store is not how we were designed to eat, where you have every fruit and vegetable all year round. It's like, no, that's not nature. Nature is what's in season. So what I say is, the vegetables trying to eat in season is going to help because your body is designed to acclimate to the environment that you're living in. So those are some simple tips that I would say.
Awesome. Love it. Yeah. The shopping around the perimeter is, I think, one of the coolest things I've learned over the last few years, because I noticed that I do that anyway. But then when someone told me that, it's like, oh yeah, you have like your dairy and your meat, and then your fruits and vegetables are all on the outside. And you start walking towards the middle, and that's where you get all your processed stuff and everything. So kind of just simply staying towards the outside. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where the real food is.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Katie, just this will bring the conversation a little bit in different direction. And I know we have maybe like 10 minutes left max, but you mentioned this is actually literally in the topic that you chose about like the spirituality of this approach. And so I'm curious, like, honestly, anywhere you want to take that, because like a lot of what we have talked about, there's like even just like parts of what you shared already. Just for example, recently and what you just shared about the nutrition, about like how, say, like the food, or in this case, like animals were treated before they were then sacrificed for our food, like how they were treated. I think that's like honestly a spiritual approach of like caring about that. But I'm curious if there's any other emphasis you wanted to share in terms of like the spiritual approach that you take in terms of helping people heal.
Sure. Well, and I said earlier that the approach that I use for cancer is called Conscious Oncology. And the
Right.
pillars of Conscious Oncology are diet, nutrition, water, physical practices, which ties into the circadian biology, emotional healing, mental healing, and spiritual healing. But the idea that all healing comes through consciousness is that if you look at, there are people who have had near-death experiences. So Anita Moorjani is a very good example. Are you guys familiar with her book, Dying to Be Me?
No.
Okay, so this is an incredible book. So Anita basically developed cancer and then had a near-death experience. She was full of lymphoma and her kidneys had gone into failure. She was in a coma and basically, they said that she would have a few hours to live. She had a near-death experience. During her near-death experience, she saw that she had created the cancer through her fear. Her biggest fear was developing cancer, and she was vegan, and she was like the picture of what you would think to avoid cancer. But here, her, like that kind of tightness around doing all the right things is actually what created this illness in her body. And she saw that if she came back into her body, that she could heal it because she had created it. And so she came back in, and sure enough, she healed it. And for me, I think that that is possible. I think what happened is she connected to her divine nature, and our divine nature can heal, right? So this is our divine right, that our body is designed to heal, but we need to get all the pieces lined up for that to happen. And I don't think you need to die to have that happen. So my pillars, I don't think any one of these things is the cure for cancer, but what we're doing is we're detoxifying the body and nourishing it with what it needs so that people can get aligned so that divine healing can happen. And now I'm seeing it in my practice where I've only been really in practice. I started in October, but really didn't start seeing patients until about February. So maybe 5 months now. And
Yeah.
I already have 2 people who have cured their cancer with doing this approach. And it's this connection. And so when I think about spirituality and this healing, like the healing comes from our divine nature. We are divine, but we've taken on this human body for this lifetime. But when we can connect those two and we can remove the blocks that keep us connected from our divine nature, the healing just happens naturally. And the spiritual aspect of my practice specifically is not like any specific path or, anything about God or whatever. It's actually about who are you authentically? Who did you come here to be? And let's look at the ways you've maybe been conditioned to become someone else. Like, for example, me, I had been conditioned to be this doctor and doing these things. And it's been this peeling back to get myself back in touch with who I am and why I came to this planet in the first place. And when we're aligned like that with who we really are, it's very powerful. And the body's healing capabilities are tied to that alignment. So that's a big part of my practice, helping people starting to let go. Sometimes you don't know what you are meant to do. You just know what's not right. And as you peel back, just like I did, making those decisions to let things go, you start to get more connected with who you are.
I love it.
Beautifully said.
Yeah,
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, when I was practicing acupuncture, that's kind of like what I would tell patients. It's like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just like helping your body get into the right, like, physical place and mental place so that the natural healing abilities can just take over. Like you're doing the work. So I think that's very much in alignment with what you said. So it's cool. Well,
Any other questions, Chris?
I feel like I have so many questions that I can go to, but just in the interest of time and not taking the podcast a completely other way in 30 minutes, we might want to, Katie, we usually leave some space at the end for you to say anything that, maybe we didn't get to, during our discussion that you want our listeners to know, and then also just kind of places where people can find you if they want to connect with you more.
Sure. Well, I think the one thing that I would say is that I don't believe the narrative about cancer anymore. I don't think that cancer is incurable. I don't think that it's ever too late. It's never too late to heal. Instead of doing a double negative, I'll say it's never too late to heal. And I think Anita's story is an example of that. And I'm also seeing in my practice where one of those radical remissions was someone with a brain tumor who her cancer had spread to her brain, and that went away. So I think letting people know that these scary diagnoses, there's a way to heal, that our bodies are and our minds are way more powerful than we've been led to believe. And that I think that that's important for people to know, because there aren't a lot of doctors out there saying that that's possible. And I really do believe that. And I believed it when I stepped into this practice, but now that I'm seeing it, I'm like, okay, this is exciting to really be changing the narrative about what's possible. And if people want to find me, they can find me at katiedeming.com. And my podcast is called Born to Heal. And on my podcast, I started it before I left Western medicine. So the first couple seasons are these little snippets of helping people who are getting conventional therapy. But starting in February of this past year, or 2024, I started to share my story of leaving Western medicine and then bringing on guests that are teaching me the things that I really believe doctors should be taught in medical school, and teaching my audience along with me. So it's been like I'm a student again, and I'm learning, and I'm bringing my audience along on that journey. And actually, Daryl Pollock from the Fourth Phase of Water was my first guest on the new season. So I'll send you guys that episode so you can hear his work, because he's incredible.
That's awesome.
Great.
Thank you for doing the work you're doing in the world. I think it's really essential for our whole planet.
Thank you, guys. Well, thank you for what you're doing. I'm so grateful to be on here and to share my little piece of what I'm doing.
That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. And if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. And if you'd love to connect with us on Instagram, our podcast tag is @Science and Spirituality Podcast.
You can also help us out by rating the podcast and leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. That way we can reach more people and impact more lives. Now, with that said, we'll see you in the next episode.